The day my daughter showed up after 15 years of silence, she didn't bring flowers or an apology. She brought 2 suitcases, and the first thing she said was, "Dad, that $36 million. We deserve a share." And me? I just stood there, smiling. Not the happy smile of a father reunited, but the quiet smile of a man who had once run a seaport and was now about to coordinate one final shipment in his life, a shipment called justice. 3 months later, the same people who once called me a useless old man were exposed before 300 people and television cameras. Not because I shouted, but because the truth always finds its own way into the light. This story will make you rethink the word family. Stay with me, because I will show you that justice doesn't need noise. It only needs timing. And sometimes, silence is the strongest answer. If you've ever been betrayed, belittled, or robbed of the respect you deserved, hit follow, turn on notifications, and comment with your city's name so I know there are still people out there who believe dignity never goes out of style. The camera lights made Charles Merritt squint. He stood in the main hall of the Florida Lottery headquarters in Tallahassee, holding a giant check that read $36 million, the glittering numbers shining like sunlight over the waters of Jacksonville Port, where he had spent 40 years of his life as a logistics manager. Reporters crowded in, microphones pointing like the cranes that once surrounded him during shipping operations. "How do you feel, Mr. Merritt? What's the first thing you'll buy?" Charles forced a smile, feeling the muscles of his face tighten like steel cables. "I've lived simply for 67 years, he said. "Now I just want to keep it that way." A female reporter in the third row raised her hand, voice smooth as wine. "Will you share this joy with your family?" The question hit a scar. He paused half a beat. "I have relatives who've gone their own way," he replied softly, still smiling. Under the bright lights, his answer sounded like a shipping report. Precise, brief, emotionless. The press conference lasted 20 minutes, and when the cameras shut off, Charles felt an emptiness unlike anything before. In his life, he had stood before hundreds of workers, handled container crises, directed cargo worth tens of millions of dollars, but never had he wanted to leave a room so quickly. Under Florida law, lottery winners must reveal their identities. No hiding behind a revocable trust, no sending a representative. The name Charles Merritt appeared on every evening newscast, his strained smile beside a check almost as tall as he was. Back in his small riverside apartment, he turned on the TV and saw himself on the screen. The anchor's cheerful voice declared, "Florida's luckiest man today is 67-year-old Charles Merritt from Jacksonville." He stared at the image like a container left unsealed, filled with precious cargo and no guard in sight, a feeling of exposure and vulnerability, as if the world now knew his warehouse was open. 3 days later, the after-tax amount, $21 million, appeared in his checking account at First National Bank. The white numbers glowed coldly on the screen. No ship clocks, no port sirens, just the heartbeat of a man who no longer knew where to begin with a treasure he had no one to share with. He called his financial advisor, Elliot Barnes, who welcomed him in an office smelling of leather and oak. Elliot spoke with the smooth confidence of someone familiar with money. "With this amount, Mr. Merritt, the priority is protection. Florida is full of people who hunt lottery winners." Charles nodded. He understood risk not as a spreadsheet term, but as reality. He had spent a lifetime ensuring cargo reached safely from point A to point B. Now he had to move his life the same way, without being robbed. Elliot advised splitting the funds into 3 separate accounts, adding an escrow account for large transactions, especially property purchases. Don't withdraw cash. Don't let anyone know what you're doing. A week later, Charles signed a contract to buy a villa worth $1.2 million in Orlando's Baldwin Park. Quiet, gated, with a man-made lake. The money was wired directly from his main account through escrow to keep the record discreet. Everything legal, clean, and precise, just like the shipping processes he'd overseen all his life. On the day he received the keys, Orlando, rain fell like thin ribbons across the stone patio. He stood in the empty living room, his reflection thin, shoulders slightly stooped, eyes still sharp as steel. The wide, high-ceilinged room echoed only with the sound of a TV replaying the press conference. Charles Merritt, the luckiest man in Florida. He turned it off. The chandelier light spilled gold onto the cold tile, like sunset on an empty deck. The house was vast, but without laughter, footsteps, or another breath. He opened his laptop and glanced again at the balance. $21,004,617.28. The numbers stretched like nautical coordinates, precise, clear, and utterly emotionless. He made coffee and stepped onto the balcony. Baldwin Lake lay still, a few ducks gliding by, leaving ripples that faded like the years he'd lost. In his mind he heard Elise, his wife, gone 10 years, whisper through the wind over the old pier. You always knew how to protect the cargo, Charles, but who will protect you? He smiled faintly, wearier than the photo they'd shown on TV, and in that moment, under the warm light and the silence of the house, he understood that sometimes luck is just another way of being exposed. The Orlando breeze drifted gently through the curtains that afternoon. Charles sat on the sofa, facing a glass table and an old photo album whose leather cover had worn thin, its corners curling like they had been gnawed by rain. In the first frame, 10-year-old Abigail smiled brightly at the Jacksonville port, where he had once taken her to watch cargo ships depart. She had said, "When I grow up, I'll go far like those ships, but I'll come back, because you're here, Dad." He turned the page. The next photo was from 15 years ago, the day she graduated. A gust of wind made the photo edge tremble. Memories flooded back like the dust of the warehouses seeping into his eyes. That summer afternoon, his small riverside apartment glowed in the late light. He still wore his faded blue manager's uniform, his hands smeared with oil. The doorbell rang, the sound he had long stopped expecting. Abigail stepped in, 23 years old, with Ryan Doyle, her fiancé, 26, in a crisp white shirt, stiff collar, and a confident smile. They didn't sit down immediately. Their eyes roamed around the modest apartment, laced with subtle judgment. "Dad," Abigail began, her voice sweet but taut. "Ryan and I are starting a business, Aura Wedding Decor. It's a really promising concept, intelligent lighting for wedding venues. We just need a little more funding." Charles took off his glasses and wiped them with his sleeve. "How much?" $50,000, Ryan answered quickly, his smile firm. "We already have the plan. ROI in 6 months. Your daughter can't fail, right?" Charles nodded slowly, as though listening to a new logistics report. "I don't have much. I've saved 10,000. 2 years of savings. Since your mom passed. Insurance, utilities." Abigail froze. 10,000? Her tone dropped like metal scraping across the floor. "You've been a warehouse manager for 40 years, and you only have 10,000? Ryan chuckled lightly, just enough for the condescension to reach Charles's ears. "Well, honey, they call that limited income. The man moves thousands of containers but can't hold on to any capital of his own." Abigail turned to her father, her eyes mixed with shame and disappointment. "Dad, do you know what people say about your job? They say, warehouse manager, the man who moves other people's success. You move goods that make others rich, but you're always stuck on the dock." The air froze. Outside the window, a ship's horn echoed long and low. Charles stood, opened a drawer, and took out his checkbook. His hands trembled, his writing uneven. "I only have 10,000. It's not an investment. It's a gift if you need it." He tore the check and placed it on the table. "You owe me nothing. But don't ever call my work useless. Because of it, you had a home to grow up in." Abigail didn't look at him. She pushed the check aside, her voice rising. 10,000 won't help. You've always lived small. You don't understand the world anymore. Ryan folded his arms, indifferent. Thank you, Mr. Merritt, but we need partners with vision. And before Charles could put the checkbook away, the thin slip of paper hit the floor. The sound was dry, faint, almost nothing, but to him it rang like a container, crashing from a crane onto a deck. The door shut. Their footsteps faded down the hall. The scent of expensive perfume mixed with the smell of old machine oil. A collision of worlds, the one that had left him and the one that no longer needed him. He sat back down, staring at the check lying sideways on the floor, his shaky signature still wet. The ink bled through the paper, spreading like an oil spill. He didn't pick it up right away. When the sun dipped behind the port, his shadow stretched long across the room, touching the check, as if the two of them were aging together in the same moment. Back in the present, Charles closed the album. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioner. He placed the album on the table and walked to the balcony. Baldwin Lake shimmered in the distance like molten metal. A small boat glided across, leaving ripples that spread like unfinished memories. He wondered if Abigail still remembered the day she said she would come back, or if those words, like everything in logistics, had merely been transit cargo, arriving, then gone. A strange feeling rose within him, not quite anger, not sadness, but a hollow, shaped by contempt, a silence colder than any insult. He turned back inside and gently closed the balcony door. In that instant, the wind was shut out, just like the words between him and his daughter, trapped for 15 years inside a house too big for anyone to hear. And deep down, he knew, there is nothing more cruel than being called useless by your own child. That afternoon, the Orlando sunlight was golden like honey, sliding through the glass frame and falling onto the cold stone floor. I was rearranging the bookshelf in the library, nothing but old volumes on logistics, risk management, and supply chain operations. All my life, I believed that as long as one understood process and data, one could control everything. I was wrong. The clock read 4:30. The doorbell rang. 2 times, intermittent, strong and decisive. Not the kind of knock from a stranger, but from someone who believed they had the right to step in. I put down the resilient supply chain and walked to the door. Through the frosted glass, I saw 2 figures and a silver-gray sedan parked out on the driveway. On the roof were 2 large suitcases, tied with fabric straps. I had only moved here 8 days ago. The villa in Baldwin Park still smelled of fresh paint, and now and then the wind carried the scent of pine and polish. Everything was clean, quiet, like an empty container no one dared to lay a hand on. When I opened the door, they were there. Abigail looked around, eyes wide as if she had just walked into a different movie of her life. "Dad, is this really your house?" she exclaimed, her voice tinged with a little amazement and a little calculation. Ryan gave a low whistle, peered inside, then blurted, "Wow, the ceilings are really high. Italian tile. Do you have a decorator? I have a friend in Miami who does design, affordable but classy." Abigail cooed, "So beautiful. With this light, a wedding photo redo would surely be dazzling. I didn't think you would choose a style this modern." I looked at them and did not answer. People often say compliments are the easiest way to unlock a door, and they had done exactly that. In their eyes I did not see joy, only a gaze scanning the value of each item. I looked at them, 2 familiar yet distant faces, and in my heart I felt no reunion, only something cold as metal. Recognition. 15 years. Not a single call, not a single birthday card, not a single inquiry on the days I lay in the hospital after heart surgery. And yet with just 2 minutes on television, they had found their way back. I heard Abigail say, "I saw your name on TV," and wanted to laugh. They did not see me. They saw a number, $36 million, printed on a check as big as a gravestone of guilt. People say time heals all wounds. I do not believe it. Time only teaches us how to look at scars without wincing. I looked at Ryan and saw he still kept his hands in his pockets, the confident smile of someone who had never had to bear responsibility. Those eyes 15 years ago looked at me the same way, as if at a night watchman, an excess figure in the ledger of their lives. Now they stood at my door again, bringing suitcases, plans, and something pretending to be kinship. I was not surprised. In logistics, I learned one thing. Whatever was lost once will be lost again if it is not sealed. Family is the same. I had sealed my trust for 15 years, but instead of slamming the door, I opened it, because sometimes, to protect what one has, one must make others believe the door is still open. We searched for a long time before finding your new address online. $36 million, Dad. We had to come right away. Congratulations to Dad. I stood still. The slanting sunlight fell across their faces. In that moment, I realized the people before me had not come to celebrate. They had come to appraise. Ryan spoke first. Dad, now you are a person of influence. You need people who know how to manage finances and plan investments. I have experience in the startup field, and Abby has aesthetic sense. We can help you run this asset base. Abigail followed, her voice soft, like a silk thread wrapped around a blade. Father, you are no longer young. Paperwork, signing, investing. Sometimes you need someone you trust. I only want you to be safe. No longer young, I repeated in my head, hearing it like steel scraping against steel. I smiled, the smile of someone who has learned how to hide a wound. It's good that you care, I said slowly. Come in. They stepped inside, eyes sweeping fast like a warehouse scanner. Ryan nodded at the wine cabinet. Nice, but a bit empty. I know someone in Miami who imports Italian furniture. We should upgrade a little. Let me think about it, I replied, my voice even and thin like the lake's surface. Abigail came closer, put her hand on my arm, her eyes shimmering as if reciting a rehearsed line. Dad, I know what happened back then hurt you, but now it's different. We want to be here, help you, share this future together. Be here? I asked. Yes, Ryan said quickly. Just temporarily. We brought a few things. You don't mind, do you? Without waiting for my answer, he went to the car and opened the trunk. 2 suitcases, 1 fabric bag, 1 makeup box. Abigail smiled, pulling the suitcases into the house as if that door had never had a lock. I stood and watched, no longer angry, only cold. Sometimes anger cools because one has already seen the entirety of another's plan before they themselves know it. That dinner, they talked a lot. Ryan rattled on about diversified investments, international stocks, offshore accounts. Abigail spoke of asset authorization, power of attorney. Every word they said was carefully chosen, light as a feather but dropping like stone. I just want to make sure that if anything happens, your paperwork is safe, she said. I set down my knife and looked at the glass of water in front of me. Safe, I repeated. Yes, I understand the value of safety better than anyone. After dinner, I left the table. They stayed in the living room, the sound of TV, laughter, clinking glasses. I went to the study at the end of the hall. The desk lamp cast light onto the wooden surface. I opened the laptop, the cursor blinking on a white screen. I typed, Asset Protection Plan, Review Trust Options, Revocable, Irrevocable, Separate Bank Accounts, Attorney Consultation, Estate Law, Risk, Family Claims. I read it over. A familiar feeling flooded back, like drafting a quarterly shipping plan across pirate-prone waters. Only this time the cargo was my life. The clock struck 11 at night. Upstairs, laughter drifted down. I looked up at the ceiling, the light reflecting in my eyes. Not angry, not sad, only alert. I closed the laptop, opened my phone, and found in my contacts the name Elliot, the bank advisor, had once suggested. Robert Chen Law Group, Estate Planning, Orlando. I pressed call. Robert Chen's office, hello. The next morning I woke early. Orlando was overcast. A thin mist draped over Baldwin Lake like smoke. Upstairs was still silent. They were probably still asleep. I made coffee, set the cup on the kitchen counter, and left the house just as the clock struck 8:15. The road to the Robert Chen Law Group curved through a new commercial district, spotless and bright, like everything untouched by human damage. A green glass building bore a silver sign, estate planning, trust and asset protection. I pushed the door open. The young receptionist smiled. Mr. Merritt, Attorney Chen is waiting in room 3. Robert Chen was an Asian man around 50, of small frame, sharp eyes, who spoke little but precisely. As I explained my situation, he nodded, opened a notebook, and jotted a few lines. Florida requires public disclosure of lottery winners, he said slowly. So the first thing we'll do is separate the assets from your personal name. I recommend establishing a revocable living trust, legally titled the Merritt Family Trust. You'll be the sole trustee during your lifetime, the primary beneficiary, and I'll add 2 organizations as successor beneficiaries after your passing. Organizations? I asked. Chen turned his screen toward me, a list of Orlando charities. I scanned the list and stopped at 2 lines. Florida Veterans Fund, Orange County Animal Shelter. I pointed. I've spent my life with veterans and abandoned animals. They both know the meaning of loyalty. Chen nodded, smiling faintly. He typed a few lines into the draft, then paused. And family? You have a daughter, right? I was silent for a few seconds, then said, Yes, but I don't want her included in the will, not out of anger, but out of choice. Chen looked at me over his half-rimmed glasses. Would you like me to state that explicitly? Yes. The exact line should read, I explicitly disinherit my daughter, not from anger, but deliberate choice. I want anyone reading it to see reason, not resentment. He nodded and began typing. The sound of his keyboard was steady, each keystroke like the locking of a container door. When the draft was done, Chen explained the process. We'll transfer the ownership of the villa, 3 bank accounts, and your investment portfolio into the trust. Everything will remain confidential, protected from public records. You still control it all. The only difference is, on paper, your name no longer appears. I signed each page. The blue ink of my Parker pen slid across the paper, leaving neat, firm strokes. When I was done, Chen said, Mr. Merritt, from now on, no one can claim a share of these assets by virtue of family ties. Your trust is legal, transparent, and unchallengeable unless proven fraudulent. I nodded. Thank you, Mr. Chen. I'm not building a wall to hide. I'm building a gate to control. He smiled, understanding. By noon, I stopped at a small cafe near Lake Eola. The trust documents in my jacket pocket felt as heavy as a lifetime journal. I ordered a chicken sandwich and black coffee. As I paid, my phone buzzed, an unknown number from Winter Park. A firm, steady male voice said, Mr. Merritt, this is Marcus Green, the private investigator Mr. Chen mentioned. Yes, Mr. Chen said you could verify some information without crossing legal lines. Exactly. I only use public liens, court filings, and soft pull credit reports. No privacy violations. I used to work in banking, so I understand loan patterns and credit histories. Start with the names Ryan Doyle and Abigail Merritt Doyle, I said. I just want to know their debt levels, mortgages, and business histories. I want truth, not judgment. I'll have a report in 3 days. No recordings, no personal account access. Everything I find will be public under Florida law. I understand you're doing this for ethical reasons. I paused. Not ethics. Prevention. In logistics, every plan needs a backup. I like how you think, he said, chuckling lightly. Once I have results, I'll send them to both you and Attorney Chen to ensure legality. That afternoon, I returned home. The sky had cleared. Sunlight streamed through the orange trees, scattering gold across the porch. Ryan's sedan was still there. Music drifted from upstairs, Bluetooth speakers, laughter, clinking glasses. I set the trust documents on my desk. Chen's words echoed in my head. A man who once ran a port understands that safety doesn't come from high walls, but from controlling the flow map. I opened my laptop and typed the final line into my notes. Phase 1 complete. Legal protection secured. Next, ethical test. I sat still, watching Baldwin Lake shimmer in the fading light. In logistics, I had protected cargo from material loss. Now, I was learning how to protect the meaning of honesty from hands that bore my name. I whispered to myself, for the first time in my life, I'm not managing cargo. I'm managing justice. 3 days later, the phone rang while I was watering the small orange trees in front of the house. The screen displayed the name Marcus Green. I turned off the hose, wiped my hands with a towel, and answered, Mr. Merritt. His voice was low and dry, like the sound of paper files. I have the results. Would you prefer to meet in person? That would be better, I replied. Where? There's a small cafe on Park Avenue, right across from the Orange County Courthouse. 5 o'clock this afternoon. Pine and Bean was busy during rush hour. I arrived early and chose a table by the window. Marcos walked in exactly on time. Blue shirt, khaki pants, the neat posture of a former cop. He placed a thick brown folder on the table. All public data, he said. I pulled these from court records, public filings, and the LexisNexis database. Nothing beyond legal limits. You can rest easy. I nodded. I only want the truth. No tricks. Marcus opened the folder. Inside were copies of debts, late notices, and civil filings. So many pages they had to be clamped together. He began summarizing, voice steady and emotionless, the tone of someone long accustomed to watching tragedy through a legal lens. Ryan Doyle, 39, former sales assistant at Bright Edge Marketing, terminated last October. Reason, underperformance and use of the company card for personal expenses. No criminal charge, but there's an internal record. He turned the next page. 6 credit cards, all maxed out. Total debt is $47,000. Personal loan, $28,000. 3 months delinquent. They received an eviction notice on December 28th. 3 months rent unpaid. Case pending. All have docket numbers on the Hillsborough County portal. I stayed silent, eyes fixed on each figure as if inspecting the manifest of damaged containers. Marcus handed me a few more sheets. Here's Abigail Merritt Doyle. Works part-time at home decor outlet. Income is about $2,000 a month. No savings account. Current credit score 612. Car loan 9,800. Still paying installments. He paused, pulled out the last note, a single-page summary. All these debts predate your lottery win. I checked the timestamps. The eviction filing was submitted 3 days before the Florida lottery announced your name. They didn't visit you. They were looking for an exit. I leaned back in my chair, a chill crawling down my spine. The pieces aligned perfectly, their sudden reappearance, the bright smiles, the compliments on the villa, all just a polished shell on a sinking ship. They saw me as a lifeboat, I said slowly, and I saw cargo worth protecting. Marcus tilted his head. What do you plan to do next? I used to run a port, I said. When a ship's overloaded, you can't save everything. You just make sure the cargo isn't stolen. Marcus closed the folder and slid it toward me. I'll keep a copy. If you ever need legal verification, I can testify that the data is lawful. I'm not suing, I said. I just wanted clarity, so the next move lands exactly where it should. On the way home, the city lights flickered on. Golden reflections smeared across the car window, like oil spreading on water. I stopped at a corner on Colonial Drive, staring at the glowing sign of First National Bank. 30 years in supply chain management had taught me how to read transport maps and spot leaks. Life was no different. If there's a leak, you document it, seal it, then act. I reached home past 8. The upstairs lights were off. Only a lamp glowed from the living room. Ryan watching TV, feet on the table, half a beer left. Abigail sprawled on the sofa, scrolling her phone, the blue screen reflecting on her indifferent face. I walked past quietly. It wasn't anger or sadness anymore, just an emptiness with form. I understood now. They hadn't returned for love, they'd returned for debt. I whispered in my mind like a preset system command. They see a lifeboat. I see cargo to protect. And, as with every operation I had ever managed, I knew the next phase had begun. I chose Friday night to make my proposal. Orlando's air was humid, with light rain mixing the scent of earth and oranges. I cooked a more proper dinner than usual, pan-seared salmon, white wine, scented candles. Ryan looked at the table and whistled. "What's the occasion, Dad?" I replied calmly. "There is one. I want to talk about your future." Abigail set her phone down, her eyes lighting up immediately. When they sat, I poured the wine and raised my glass. "Family," I said, "is something you shouldn't abandon, even when it's been broken. I've thought a lot, and I'm willing to reconsider the will." Two faces across from me brightened instantly, as if someone had flipped a switch. Ryan leaned forward slightly, smiling. "You know, Dad, that's the best decision you've ever made." I smiled lightly, but didn't respond. After they refilled their glasses, I continued. "I don't give things away for free, not even in family matters. If you really want a place in my future, prove it through action. 6 months, volunteer consistently at 2 places, the Florida Veterans Fund and the Orange County Animal Shelter. After that, I'll reevaluate everything." Abigail nodded at once, her voice eager. "Of course, Dad. I love helping the community. 6 months is nothing." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "When you say reevaluate, what exactly do you mean? Is there paperwork or something formal?" "No," I said, "just my word. When I say something, it's worth as much as any paper." He fell silent, but I caught the flicker of calculation in his eyes. The following week, I drove them to the Orange County Animal Shelter. The air smelled of disinfectant, mixed with the barking of dogs and the clanging of cages. A middle-aged woman in a blue uniform approached, shaking my hand. "Mr. Merritt, good to see you again. Is this your family?" "My daughter and son-in-law," I said. "2 new volunteers." Sarah, the volunteer coordinator, smiled kindly. "Wonderful. We can always use more help. Come on in." Inside, Ryan subtly covered his nose. Abigail stepped carefully. The floor was damp and her shoes were dirty after only a few steps. Sarah handed out rubber gloves. "Let's start with cleaning kennels and changing the water trays." Abigail gave an awkward smile, taking the mop with trembling hands. Ryan stood with his arms crossed, surveying the place like an investment project. "Can someone else handle this? I'm afraid of doing it wrong," he asked. "Just try," Sarah replied gently. "As long as it's clean, it's fine." 3 hours later, their shirts were soaked, and their eyes irritated. On the drive home, Ryan muttered, "What a waste of time. 6 months of this will be torture." Abigail cut in, "Stop it. 6 months for a will. It's worth it." I stayed silent. Only the sound of the wipers filled the car. The next week, we went to the Veterans Fund. The building near the Orlando airport served veterans seeking counseling and work. I'd volunteered there for 2 years and knew everyone. When they saw me with 2 new volunteers, my old friends grinned knowingly. Ryan was assigned to organize files, and Abigail was assigned to make coffee. A one-armed veteran named Walter leaned toward me. "Your son-in-law looks like a man counting the minutes to leave." I smiled. At least he's learning something. 3 sessions in, Ryan always slipped out to take calls halfway through. Abigail scrolled through her phone whenever she thought no one was watching. I didn't correct them. I just observed. That night, I sat in my office reviewing Florida Statute 934.03, recording aloud if parties consent or if the area posts notice. I knew all volunteer sites had signs reading audio-video recording in use, meaning any footage wouldn't violate the law. The next day, I placed an old phone in my shirt pocket, letting a recording app run through every volunteer session. One afternoon at the shelter, I captured their clearest conversation. "Ryan, this is pointless. Just filthy dogs and cats. 6 months, then done. Abigail, shut up. If Dad hears it's over. Ryan, he won't. He's lonely and needs company. We just pretend to care. I stood a few meters away, hearing every word. I said nothing. A puppy licked my finger through the bars, small, trembling, trusting, a kind of faith I knew I'd never receive from people again. In the following weeks, I kept driving them. Same schedule, same time. They smiled, took photos, and posted online, Family Volunteering Day. But I had another set of recordings. Ryan grumbling, smells like a sewer. Abigail sighs, my Prada shoes are ruined. My own steady breathing, low, calm, drawn out like waves. I realized my silence began to unsettle them. They needed an audience, a reaction. I gave none. One side chased appearances, the other preserved truth. 6 weeks passed. Ryan began asking, how much longer till you sign the will? 5 months left, I answered. He muttered a curse under his breath. I pretended not to hear. Occasionally, Abigail brought coffee into my study to show devotion, but each time she left, her eyes flicked toward the safe where I kept my papers. One night, they argued upstairs. I sat in the reading room below, recording, hearing every word. I'm done, Ryan snapped. All this cleaning for nothing. Just hold on, Abigail said. He's old. 6 months will pass fast. A glass shattered, then silence, long and hollow. I looked up at the ceiling and whispered, my family died 15 years ago. What's above me now is only its shadow. That night, I saved all the audio files into a folder labeled Phase 2, Moral Evidence. I looked at the title, feeling empty. No joy, no anger, just one truth. They were performing for inheritance, and I was documenting why they didn't deserve it. I closed the laptop and turned off. The lights. Outside, the first summer rain drummed softly on the villa's roof, each drop striking like a metronome to a single thought. I gave them a chance to be better. They chose to be seen instead. That night, for the first time, I stopped waiting for them to change. I was only waiting for time to finish the 6-month test and end the illusion of family. The second month passed like a dull rehearsal. Every Tuesday morning, they still came with me to the animal shelter, still smiled for photos, still said things like, we're so happy to help. But their eyes could no longer hide fatigue. When you act too long, even professionals slip out of character. That night, as I was making coffee in the kitchen, Ryan walked in, shirt unbuttoned, the smell of cheap wine clinging to him. He sat down and slammed his hand on the wooden table. Dad, he said, we both know these 6 months are pointless. I've proven enough. Now you just need to advance me $100,000. Consider it part of the inheritance. I set my cup down, slowly. 100,000 is no small amount, Ryan. Not small for you, he sneered, but for someone with 21 million in the bank, that's pocket change. Abigail stood on the stairs, listening, her voice breaking in. Dad, what he means is we're struggling. Credit card debt, the old rent, and a few emergencies. I promise we'll pay it back. I turned to them, not angry, just amused. You call that a struggle? I call it consequence. Ryan's tone hardened. You're stingy. Other lottery winners give their kids millions, but you... I cut him off, voice low but firm. Every word you say is just more proof of who you are. The room chilled. Ryan kicked the chair and stormed off, the door slamming hard enough to rattle the windows. The next morning, while I was reading the paper on the porch, Abigail placed an envelope on the table. This is from my lawyer, she said, eyes averted. I opened it. 3 printed pages, Patterson and Associates letterhead. A petition for filial support. A request that I pay $5,000 a month to a daughter in financial distress. I finished reading, folded the paper, and sipped my coffee. Did your lawyer, Patterson, mention any Florida law requiring parents to pay adult children? Abigail said nothing. I took out my phone and called Robert Chen. I just received a filial support demand from Patterson and Associates, I said. Can you take a look? Send it by email, Chen replied. I'll review it right away. I opened my laptop, attached the document along with a few trimmed audio clips. Ryan demanding money, Abigail discussing how to act. I encrypted the message and sent it under the subject, Evidence, March conversation. 3 hours later, Chen called back. His tone was calm with a hint of amusement. Mr. Merritt, Florida has no filial support statute. A few northern states do, but not here. Their filing is pure intimidation, no legal weight. I figured, I said. They're aiming for pressure, not victory. I'll respond officially, Chen said. In my letter, I'll reference your recordings as evidence of ongoing support and intent to exploit. Don't worry, Patterson will understand my language. Good, I said. I don't want to win. I just want them to hear themselves. Chen paused, then said, You know, most of my clients want to silence their relatives. You let them speak until the rope tightens. I'm only doing what any port operator does, I replied. When a container starts making strange noises, you don't break it. You let it rattle until everyone hears. That evening I printed Chen's response, slipped it into a plastic folder, and set it on the dining table. When Ryan walked by, he picked it up, read a few lines, his face turning pale. He says my filing is invalid. Correct, I said, because it is invalid. Abigail stepped in, her voice trembling. Dad, we just wanted to talk properly. Fine, I said. Tomorrow we're going to the Veterans Fund on time. They need people to clean the hall for a fundraiser. I expect you to be punctual for once. They said nothing. As I stepped onto the porch, I heard Ryan mutter inside. He's playing lawyer games. Fine, we'll play too. I smiled. A soft breeze swept through, lifting a few dried orange leaves from the yard. I looked up at the Orlando night sky, black and deep, like the silence I was learning to master. Back at my desk, I opened the laptop and returned to the folder. Phase 2, Moral Evidence, adding new notes. Ryan demanded $100,000 advance, refused. Abigail and Ryan initiated filial support via Patterson, dismissed by Chen. Recordings archived. Chen holds encrypted backup. Behavior escalating. I read the last line, then typed one more sentence in English, as if writing to myself, Every word you speak is another proof of who you are. It wasn't just a reminder for them. It was a reminder for me, the man who had to stay calm in the storm of deceit, because only those who remain silent long enough can hear the real sound of life. 3 weeks after Patterson failed with the filial support claim, I received a call from Robert Chen. His voice was low and dry, as usual. Mr. Merritt, I have good news. The Florida Veterans Fund has decided to honor you at this year's Veterans Gala. 300 guests were hosted at the Ritz-Carlton Orlando, Grande Lakes. The theme this year is Service, Sacrifice, and Legacy. They've invited you as the keynote speaker. I was silent for a few seconds. In my mind, I saw chandeliers, golden reflections on glass, composed faces framed by camera flashes, a perfect place for truth to speak for itself. How soon? I asked. 2 weeks, and if you really intend to, this is the perfect time to go public. I understood exactly what he meant. No more questions were needed. 3 days later, I sat in Chen's oak-paneled office overlooking Orange Avenue. Between us lay a laptop, a small speaker, and a set of recordings I had sent through encrypted email. Chen said, I've reviewed everything. I also obtained permission to use them during your address, under the classification of educational and charitable context. Florida law permits lawful recordings to be disclosed publicly if the purpose is moral education or community awareness, not commercial use. I have written confirmation from the state attorney's office. He handed me an envelope bearing the seal of the Office of the State Attorney, 9th Judicial Circuit. So it's 100% legal, I said. More than legal, Chen replied. It's ethical. On the screen appeared the first slide, a black background, white letters. Legacy is not inherited. It's earned. Then came the first audio clip, Ryan's voice. He's nothing but a walking lottery ticket. As the sound played, Chen looked at me. We'll open with this right after you introduce your theme, family and service. The contrast will hit hard. I nodded. Let truth read its own verdict. Chen scrolled through the timeline, adjusting volumes, slotting each segment precisely. Ryan demanding $100,000. Abigail calling it the 6-month performance. Both saying, just pretend to care. Each clip trimmed clean, placed with precision. No commentary, no narration. Just their real voices. Clear, cold, undeniable. During playback, Ryan's laugh echoed, He's lonely, just needs people around. We'll fake it. The sound hung in the quiet room. Chen turned off the speaker. When that plays, he said, they won't have a word left. I stared at the blank screen reflecting my face. The lines around my eyes were deeper, but the gaze felt sharper. You think they'll attend? Without a doubt, Chen said. The confident ones always believe the stage belongs to them. The week before the event, Chen and I visited the Ritz-Carlton to test the sound and lighting. The grande ballroom ceiling soared nearly 30 feet high, chandeliers cascading like rivers of light. 300 chairs wrapped in white linen, champagne glasses already set at each table. The technician asked, Which media logo would you like displayed on the microphone? Just use Fox 35, I said. They always cover community stories. I stood at the podium, testing the mic. My voice carried with a soft echo, steady and firm. I looked around the hall, the tables, the gold light, people in suits rehearsing their steps. Everything gleamed, opulent, but under the light I saw one truth. Truth itself doesn't need a stage, only a volume high enough to be heard. Chen stood behind me, adjusting the slides. How do you want to begin? With silence, I said, so people can hear their own breathing before they hear deceit. He nodded, marking the timeline's opening. The massive LED screen behind the podium displayed Honoring Service, Exposing Pretense. As the technician ran the light test, the chandeliers reflected my gaze in thousands of crystal shards, each fragment like a broken truth waiting to be reassembled. That evening, back at the villa, I opened the wardrobe and took out the charcoal gray suit I'd saved for formal occasions. Italian wool, tailored in 2015, is still crisp. I laid it on the bed beside a black briefcase containing the trust copy, the will, and a USB drive with the presentation. At my desk, I wrote in my notebook, Phase 1st, Public Stage, Veterans Gala. 300 guests confirmed. Audio-visual tested, approved. Legal clearance obtained. Objective. Truth, not revenge. I paused, staring at the last line. Truth and revenge stood side by side. 2 containers on the same route, but bound for different ports. One carried weight, the other carried belief. I closed the notebook, turned off the light, and looked through the window. Baldwin Lake mirrored the moonlight, and somewhere beyond, music from the lakeside restaurant drifted softly, steady as a heartbeat. 2 weeks from now, everything would come into focus. Under chandeliers, amid clinking glasses, among 300 elegantly dressed guests, I would let the actors hear their own performance. And this time, I wouldn't have to say much, just stand still, the way a planner does when the final operation is ready to begin. The night of the gala, Orlando's sky looked like it had been draped in perfect black velvet, reflecting the golden glow of the Ritz-Carlton Grande Lakes across the still surface of the lake. Cars lined up before the entrance, each one a moving jewel gliding slowly through rows of palm trees. I arrived early, in my gray suit, charcoal tie, and the small Florida Veterans Fund pin gleaming on my lapel. Inside, soft piano music played, and champagne glasses shimmered beneath the chandeliers. 300 guests, veterans, business leaders, reporters, and community representatives, mingled, smiled, and posed for photos. On the main stage, the Fox 35 logo shone beside the words, Honoring Service, Building Legacy. Then I saw Ryan and Abigail enter. They looked as if the night belonged to them. Abigail in a deep crimson gown, Ryan in a white tuxedo, his hair slicked back, eyes gleaming with arrogance. They moved through the crowd, smiling at journalists, shaking hands with acquaintances. I stood quietly in the corner, observing. People often say the best actors are the ones who don't realize they're in the final act of their play. At exactly 7 o'clock, the program began. The lights dimmed, the music faded. The host called me to the stage. Applause spread like waves, steady, full, resonant beneath the high ceiling. I walked up, looking out over the golden-lit sea of faces. The Fox 35 microphone gleamed before me. I took a breath, my voice deep and clear. Thank you, everyone. Tonight, we honor two words, service and sacrifice. They don't only belong to the battlefield, but also to the bonds between people. The room grew utterly still, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. I've learned that not all wounds come from bullets. Some have the shape of silence, and sometimes silence is the only way to protect what's right. I paused as the lights shifted toward the LED screen behind me. The first slide appeared. Legacy is not inherited. It's earned. Then a recording began to play, Ryan's voice raw and unmistakable. The old man is nothing without that lottery money. Murmurs rippled through the hall. A few guests turned their heads toward Ryan. I remained still, half my face lit by the stage light, my voice calm. That's the voice of my son-in-law, a man who once said he loved me like a father. The next slide appeared, a photo of Abigail at the animal shelter, holding her phone while another volunteer cleaned kennels behind her. The caption read, 6 months of volunteering. Recorded truth. Camera shutters clicked and burst. Flashes lit the ballroom like lightning. I heard Ryan mutter, "What the hell?" followed by the scrape of a chair. Abigail forced a smile, but her lips trembled. I continued slowly, without bitterness. I gave them a moral test, not for money, but for a chance to rebuild trust. 6 months passed, and I received no change, only evidence. And tonight, before the very community that embodies service, I make this public, not for revenge, but for transparency. I opened an envelope and drew out a cream-colored document bearing the seal of the Robert Chen Law Group. This is the Merit Revocable Trust, effective March 12th. It states, I explicitly disinherit my daughter, not from anger, but deliberate choice. 60% of my estate will go to the Florida Veterans Fund. 40% will go to the Orange County Animal Shelter. The room fell silent, not a whisper. I looked down to see Ryan's face flushed as he stood abruptly. You have no right to humiliate us like this. I stayed composed, my tone softer but echoing through the hall. No one's humiliating anyone, Ryan. I'm simply letting everyone hear what you've already said. He took a step forward, but 2 hotel security officers were already in position, polite but firm. Chen signaled to the host, and gentle instrumental music began again, a slow, rhythmic drum. Abigail grabbed Ryan's hand, tears falling, though I could see in her eyes not regret, but fear. Dad, please stop. I'm begging you, she whispered. I looked at her and shook my head. No, Abby. The truth doesn't stop just because someone can't bear the light. Chen stepped forward, bowed slightly to the audience, and turned back toward me. I nodded. He motioned to the sound team, and the clip ended. The first claps rose, not loud, but firm. A veteran in the front row stood, followed by another, and then an entire row. 300 people stood and applauded. The applause wasn't for me, it was for justice. Ryan and Abigail were escorted to the exit, walking through rows of silent, watching faces. No one shouted, no one mocked. They passed through as the applause continued, each clap falling like a hammer strike. I stood there, eyes glistening, not from satisfaction, but from the quiet certainty that I had done what was right. I didn't seek justice in a courtroom, I said into the microphone. I found it where people still believe that honor is the only true wealth. The chandeliers reflected across the marble floor, their crystals trembling like metal tears. I bowed. Chen approached, whispering, "It's done?" I answered, "No, Robert. It's begun." Because I understood, justice truly begins when truth is spoken before the crowd, and when silence no longer means fear, but proof that conscience still exists. After the gala, Ryan and Abigail left the hotel in silence. From that night on, they never returned to the villa at Baldwin Park. I later heard they moved back to the old apartment in Kissimmee, the same one that had once received a debt notice Marcus mentioned in his report. 2 weeks after the gala, I received a certified letter from the offices of Patterson and Associates. The paper was thick, the ink still smelled fresh, and the heading read in bold, "Notice of lawsuit, defamation, and emotional distress." I skimmed through it and smiled faintly. The script was predictable enough to be almost comical. They alleged that I had defamed their reputation and caused severe emotional distress by disclosing the recordings during a community event. At the bottom was the signature of Lawrence Patterson, the same attorney who had earlier filed the useless filial support petition. I called Robert Chen immediately. "Looks like you've got another mess to clean up," I said. Chen chuckled through the phone. "Defamation, huh? They've tied their own noose again. In Florida, truth is an absolute defense. Leave this to me." The hearing was scheduled for the last Monday of June at the Orange County Courthouse. The courtroom was bright, its high ceiling lined with flags of red and blue. On the plaintiff's side sat Ryan and Abigail Doyle, well-dressed but pale. On the defense side sat me, next to Chen, wearing the same gray suit from the gala. Judge Margaret Holloway entered, about 50, her expression stern but not unkind. Her reputation preceded her, fair, unswayed. The clerk read aloud, "Doyle versus Merritt." Patterson stood, sounding as if he were lecturing a law class. "Your Honor, the defendant disseminated private audio in an event with media presence, causing reputational and psychological harm to my clients. We seek $5 million in damages." The judge nodded slightly. "Defense?" Chen rose, buttoning his jacket. His tone was calm and precise, the same tone he used when explaining a trust clause. "Your Honor, the recordings were made lawfully under Florida's one-party consent statute. Their public disclosure occurred within an approved charitable context, backed by written consent from the state attorney's office, and most importantly, the content disclosed was true." He turned the laptop toward the judge, displaying an email bearing the state attorney's notarized seal. The statements presented were factual. Under Florida law, truth is an absolute shield against defamation. The courtroom fell silent. Chen continued, "The plaintiffs claim emotional harm, but embarrassment over one's own conduct is not a tort, it's a consequence." A few people in the gallery laughed softly. Patterson flushed red. The judge tapped her gavel. "Order!" Chen gestured to the technician who played the recording. Ryan's voice filled the room. "That old man is nothing without his lottery money." Then Abigail's voice followed. "Just pretend to care, he won't know." Silence hung thick in the air. Judge Holloway looked straight at them, her tone clear and final. "The court finds no merit in the plaintiff's claim. The recordings were lawfully obtained, and their contents reflect the truth. Under Florida Statute 768.295, this filing constitutes an abuse of process intended to suppress free speech. Accordingly, the defendant is entitled to recover full attorney's fees and court costs." The gavel struck once, sharp and final. "Case dismissed." Chen turned to me with a small smile. "We just won, legally and morally." The next morning, local papers ran the headline, "Doyle's lose defamation case. Truth prevails." Television stations replayed a clip from my gala speech with a banner that read, "Dignity is the final legacy." 3 days later, the property management company in Kissimmee sent an eviction notice. Due to non-payment of rent for 3 consecutive months, tenants are required to vacate within 30 days. I felt no glee. When I heard the news, I simply stood by the window, looking out over Baldwin Lake. The afternoon sun stretched across the water like molten metal. There was no anger left in me, only a rare calm after a long storm. That evening, Chen stopped by with an envelope. Here's the court order for reimbursement under the anti-SLAPP statute. Patterson's firm will cover all your legal fees. I took the document, reading the final line aloud. Truth remains the strongest shield. I placed it in the drawer beside my trust papers. Robert, I said quietly, there were times I thought justice was a luxury. Turns out it only needs 2 things, patience and evidence, he smiled, and a lawyer who knows when to stay silent. I replied, silence is the last voice of truth. We sat on the porch watching the lake. The late sunlight filtered through our coffee cups, glinting on the wooden table. I noticed my hands trembling slightly, not from age, but from release. That night, I wrote in my notebook, final phase, legal justice. Defamation suit dismissed. The court affirmed my position. Legal fees reimbursed. They were evicted within 30 days. At the bottom, I added one final line, written in slanted bold ink. Justice doesn't need to shout. It only needs to exist. I closed the notebook and turned off the light. The moonlight spilled across the window, glimmering on Baldwin Lake, where the ripples kept spreading, slow and quiet, but steady as justice continuing its own course. After the court's ruling, my life gradually returned to its old rhythm, simple, quiet, like an old clock that keeps ticking without anyone winding it. I sold the villa in Baldwin Park and moved into a small townhouse in Winter Park, close to the lake and the library. 2 bedrooms, nothing luxurious, but warm. I drove the moving truck myself, loading each box of books, each piece of furniture, no movers, no help. I used to manage entire ports. A few crates of memories were nothing I couldn't handle. On the first afternoon there, I stood on the porch watching sunlight slant through rows of maples, while church bells rang in the distance. I thought of Elise, my wife. She passed away 12 years ago from cancer, just after I became head of logistics in Jacksonville. She was gentle, frugal, always saying, people aren't poor because they lack money, but because they waste meaning. Since she left, I could no longer tolerate the waste of money or emotion. Perhaps that's why I couldn't stand watching my daughter measure love in currency. I kept our wedding photo on my desk. Every morning as I brewed coffee, I would whisper, I did what you wanted. Justice is no longer just a dream. 2 months after the trial, Abigail came to see me. I saw her reflection through the glass door. Thin frame, messy hair, no makeup. When I opened the door, the scent of rain mixed with a faint perfume I remembered. Dad, she said softly, voice trembling. I just want to talk. I said nothing, avoiding her eyes. We sat across from each other in the small living room, the clock ticking between us. She told me Ryan had left, that he had lost his job, and she was working part-time at a coffee shop. Her voice was hoarse, her eyes restless. I know you hate me. I was wrong. I just want your forgiveness. I watched her for a long time, then stood, walked into my office, and took out an envelope sealed with Chen's red stamp. I set it in front of her. This is a copy of the will, I said. Your share is $1. She looked up, eyes glistening, but for the first time I saw honesty in them. No calculation, no performance. Why $1? She asked through tears. Because the law requires a number to prove I haven't forgotten you, I said, but forgiveness isn't written on paper. She cried, not loudly, just a sound like rain against wood. I didn't touch her shoulder. Forgiveness doesn't need gestures. It only needs truth. She left before sunset. I watched her small figure disappear at the corner of the street. Inside me was an unfamiliar space. Not anger, not sorrow, just a peace that had no name yet. 3 months later, on a still August afternoon, I received a cream-colored envelope postmarked from Savannah, Georgia. The handwriting was slanted and gentle. To Father. I opened it. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, smelling faintly of fresh ink and old paper. Father, I'm working at a small bookstore called Riverlight near Madison Square. No one here knows who I am, and that feels like relief. I read more now, write more, and for the first time, I feel alive. I'm sorry, not because you won, but because I lost myself. I once thought money could fix everything, but it turns out what I needed was to learn again how to live like a decent person. Thank you for not forgiving me too soon, because if you had, I never would have changed. I hope one day you'll come to Savannah, not to talk, just to share a cup of coffee in silence. I know you prefer silence over words. I love you. Abigail. I folded the letter and set it on the table. Outside, the moon rose, pale and steady through the window. I didn't write back. Forgiveness, I understood, doesn't always need to be sent in words. I stepped onto the porch. The breeze carried the scent of jasmine from the neighbor's yard. Moonlight spread over the lake like a thin sheet of silver, reflecting the image of an old man holding a letter. I looked up at the sky, smiled, and whispered, "Thank you for finally hearing what I never said." And in that moonlight, I realized, silence was no longer the distance between two people. It had become the bridge, fragile but enduring, connecting father and daughter through the only language that never goes out of time, truth. The following autumn, Orlando grew quieter. Lake Baldwin shimmered with golden sunlight like honey, and the maple trees lining the paths had begun to turn amber. I received letters from the Florida Veterans Fund and the Orange County Animal Shelter, the two organizations that had shared portions of the charitable trust I founded. They wanted to merge and expand into a new facility named the Merit Opportunity Center, dedicated to helping both veterans and abandoned animals heal, recover, and rediscover their purpose. In their letter, they wrote, "We want to use your name, not for the money, but for the spirit you've left behind." I attended the opening ceremony on a Saturday morning. A large sign stood in the courtyard, Merit Opportunity Center, where loyalty finds home. A soft breeze fluttered the red ribbon tied across the doorway. Under the freshly painted porch, a few puppies ran around freely, while in the distance a group of veterans planted trees, laughing and talking like lifelong friends. The program director, Mr. Bailey, stepped up to the podium. His voice was strong, yet warm. This place used to be called the Bailey Center, but today we officially changed its name, because there are people like Mr. Merritt who've shown that family isn't just about blood. It's about those who stay when the door closes. Applause rose, steady and heartfelt. I stood in the back, avoiding the spotlight. Chen was there, smiling quietly. He whispered, "They don't realize how many lives you've saved, with nothing but patience." The ceremony ended with the ribbon cutting. I was invited to join two veterans and a young volunteer. When the ribbon broke, the sound of applause, barking dogs, and gentle music filled the air. I looked around, no chandeliers, no champagne, no grand stage, just genuine smiles from people who had once fallen but learned to stand again. In that moment, I understood. Family is simply those who still show up, even when they have no obligation to. An elderly veteran with silver hair approached and shook my hand. "Mr. Merritt," he said, "you know, these dogs made me laugh again after 10 years. Thank you for leaving something that truly helps." I replied, "No need to thank me. I'm only giving back what life once taught me. That loyalty comes in many forms." That evening I sat on the townhouse balcony in Winter Park, a cup of hot tea in my hand. Beside me was Diane, the librarian from the place where I often read. We had met through small conversations about literature and long, quiet afternoons at the same table. Words were never necessary, just the comfort of silence. Moonlight draped over the lake, flickering on the water. Diane asked softly, "Have you ever thought about writing it all down?" I smiled. "No need. It's already written. in my heart, and in how people remember that center. She rested her head on my shoulder. The night breeze carried the scent of jasmine and the chirping of crickets. I reached into the small drawer beside the chair, where I kept Abigail's letter carefully folded. The moonlight touched the paper, the slanted handwriting soft as breath. I didn't open it, just brushed my fingers over it, afraid to break something fragile. Diane glanced at me and smiled. "Thinking about your daughter again?" I nodded. "Yes, but it's different now. I no longer wait for an apology. I only hope she's at peace." We sat like that, silent. In the distance, church bells marked 9 o'clock. Each chime sounded like a door closing on the past. I looked at the lake, where moonlight stretched into a silver path, and I realized peace does have a shape. It isn't money, nor victory. It's the moment you stop, needing to win against anyone. I whispered so softly no one could hear. Justice can make a man lonely, but forgiveness, even late, makes him human again. As the wind rustled through the leaves and moonlight fell across the folded letter, I knew my life had finally come full circle. No stage, no applause, just this perfect silence. And in that silence, peace had a name. Its name was merit. If you've listened this far, thank you for walking with me to the very end of this story. I didn't tell it to be pitied, nor to be praised. I told it to remind you that justice isn't only found in a courtroom. It's found in how you choose to live after being hurt. If you've ever been underestimated, used, or betrayed by your own, remember this. You still have the right to draw your boundaries and to find peace, again, in your own way. Comment the name of your city below, so I'll know that somewhere out there, people still believe dignity never goes out of style, and that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means refusing to let pain steer your life. Don't forget to follow and turn on notifications, because I'll keep sharing true stories about perseverance, quiet justice, and those who seemed broken but stood up to write their own final chapter. Because in the end, each of us has a merit opportunity center, a peaceful place that bears our own name.